Hi, I'm Tamara, and this is TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Hi, everyone. Today I'm speaking with Alvin Law. Maybe you've seen Alvin speak. He's a well-known motivational speaker across the country and internationally. But today we talk about his experience as a disabled person living in Canada. He was born with no arms as the result of the drug thalidomide. We talk about what that was like, what his parents were like when he was growing up, and his experience with discrimination for his disability, and how he fell into motivational speaking. It's a fantastic conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, Alvin. It's so wonderful to have you here and speak with you.
Thanks, Tamara. I love the internet for the modern technology of meeting in the same space thousands of miles apart.
It's pretty incredible, isn't it? Now, you're in Alberta, right?
I'm in Calgary.
Okay, perfect. So, Alvin, I'm familiar with you because I've seen you around, and I've seen you around. But for people who don't know who you are or haven't seen you speak, how do you describe yourself?
Well, there's about 3 different labels that I have affixed to my life. And as a professional speaker, I also use these, in a professional manner. It's quite funny. My wife jokes about one day we were going up to Tim Hortons and I have no arms. And I'll talk about how that happened in a minute. But I also drive a car. I steer with my right foot on the wheel and my left foot on the gas. And this is not only probably 10 years ago, and my wife and I have been together for over 30 years. We went to Tim Hortons for something, and I just did a commercial, didn't I? Anyway, we went to Tim Hortons for something, and as I'm going up to the window, Darlene says, "Do you ever wonder what it looks like?" And I went, "What do you mean what I look like? I know what I look like." She goes, "No, honey, really. Do you ever wonder what people feel when they see you come up to the drive-thru and stick your foot out the window with your money?" And I've done it thousands of times, right? And I said, "Well, what would you have me do?" She goes, "Prepare them." So I have almost a pocket-sized little speech where when I pull up to the drive-thru, I say, "By the way, I was born without arms, I use my feet for everything, and I am a victim of a drug called thalidomide." That is the short answer. But I think the definition of that thalidomide stigma was a bigger deal in my life than anything else. And I think, we're going to get a little warm and fuzzy here today, Tamara. It's unavoidable. I don't have a disability. But I'm not one of those, if I may use this expression, and I can't do the air quotes, an activist with a chip on my shoulder. And I say that with nothing but respect because I love my life. I love that I have no arms because having been born this way led me down the path and the journey that I took in my life. And that is what I love to talk about. And especially here, I want to enlighten, but I don't want it to be me. Because there was way more than me that made this product you see today.
So, okay, let's talk about growing up with no arms. A lot of people today in 2022, they have no idea what thalidomide is or what that means or what that word is or how it affected a lot of Canadians. And so let's start there. Let's start with, thalidomide. What is it?
Well, I don't want to put any shockwaves into this interview, Tamara, because that's not my style. But believe it or not, thalidomide was created at Auschwitz. It was a sedative, and they made up this drug to give to the people they were about to end the lives to make them manageable. And even scarier, the first group of people that lives were taken at these death camps, believe it or not, were people with disabilities. Now, I'm not trying to shock the audience, but it's one of the reasons why I sound like an idealist, because I refuse to look at that part of our history and dictate my presence. So thalidomide was a bad thing right from the start. The worst part about it is, and we've learned this through COVID, they didn't need to do any tests back then. So when the war ended, a company called Grunenthal was formed. They're still around, and believe it or not, they made $6 billion last year on the sale of thalidomide. It's still around. It is actually a very, very common treatment for multiple myeloma, the blood cancer. It actually treats leprosy. The point is, though, I could get fussy and upset about the fact Grunenthal still exists, but the reality is the drug is not used on pregnant women anymore. And we learned that. About 125 Canadians that we know of were born with various limb deficiencies, around 14,000 around the globe. So shockingly, not as big a number as it could have been. And I was born in the summer of 1960 in a small town in Saskatchewan, and they had no idea what had happened. But we were able to determine that my birth mother's gynecologist was one of the test doctors to hand out the samples of the medicine in 1959, and this is what happened.
And how did the government of Canada treat people who were born without limbs from thalidomide?
Well, at first, the government of Canada really, typical Canadian, it wanted to do something right. But the problem is the government of Canada is politics. So there was a lot of finger pointing. In fact, to be quite blunt about this, it wasn't until about 6 years, maybe 7 years ago, under the previous Harper government, that the government stood all together in the House of Commons to pass a motion to provide lifelong pensions for us survivors because they acknowledged the drug should have never been allowed in the country in the first place. I got to be honest again. I'm not a big fan of retroactive compensation. But the fact also is I am one of the very fortunate that has remarkable independence. So again, you're seeing an idealistic story in a sense today that I have no challenges in my life per se, but I'm not typical. The more typical people actually were missing parts of all four limbs, sometimes all four limbs completely. But the worst part of the story for them, they didn't hit the jackpot like I did and not financially with pensions. But I was also homeless when I was 5 days old. My birth family gave me up because the government basically at the time said, these children will have zero quality of life and we'll make sure that we take care of them in institutions. Well, when my birth family gave me up, my foster parents came in and adopted me. My mom was 55 and my dad was 53 when they took me home as a newborn. And because they didn't have any, as Dr. Phil would say, dog in the hunt, they didn't care what the cause was. All they knew was whatever happened wasn't as important as what was going to happen.
Wow. 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 That is the jackpot, isn't it?
Yep.
It really
And remember,
is.
they didn't know what they were doing. Mom couldn't exactly Google no arms, right? Siri, what do we do? Yeah.
Yeah. And so
they never
that must
added
have been an interest. Sorry, Alvin. It must have been quite the experience for your parents.
Yeah. To be quite honest about this too, and I don't know why I use that phrase, they had no idea what they were doing. But what they learned very quickly, as my mom would say over and over and over again, when people stopped looking at what you were missing, they saw a baby, a little boy, a teenager. My wife never even knew a handicapped person in her life before she met me. And she married me. I mean, I know why I married her. She's hot. But why'd she marry me? I don't think it was the biceps. My parents, and I'm biased, my parents were remarkable human beings. That's why they had a foster home, because their family had already grown up. But mom felt it was wrong to have 2 empty bedrooms in a house where people were living, not in the streets, because they didn't do that in Yorkton, Saskatchewan, but living in abusive environments. They took in a lot of troubled teenagers for temporary stays. But the key was they never judged. And when they saw me, of course, they took me home, not thinking I was going to stay. I was going to be a temporary, just like all the other foster kids. But as my dad used to say, he kind of grows on you. You just got to give it a little time. And I became their third son. And really, that's exactly what I was. I was the third son, although my brothers are a lot older. My brother John is going to be 90 in July. And I'm going to be 62. So that's my age, in case anybody's wondering.
Well, you look great.
Thanks.
Alvin, so, I mean, you look forward. You are a motivational speaker. You have a positive outlook on life. Is this because of the way you were brought up?
Yeah, and I'm going to get a little bit old school preachy here, okay? I'll give you a really quick example. In 1966, I was just a regular little boy in our community. We lived in a place called Yorkton, Saskatchewan, population around 10,000 back then. And there was a school right across the street from our house in Yorkton called St. Alphonsus Elementary. Mom and dad assumed I would go across the street to go to school. They didn't know the rules because they were ignorant. But we found out that handicapped children, there's that word again, did not go to public schools in 1966. And then my mom and dad challenged them. But more than anything, mom and dad made them understand I was a member of the neighborhood. And the school basically said, we've never done this before. And my dad said, gee, that's funny. Neither have we. So again, not adversarial. They worked together with the school. I got to go to a regular school. But the most important part of that story is I grew up understanding education was not a right. It was a privilege.
That's interesting because, my son has an intellectual disability. And so when I think about his education, it's not viewed. I think that people tend to look at these things, they look at disability, but then they sort of put disability in a hierarchy, if you will. And intellectual disability goes to the bottom, right? And I interviewed Judith Heumann, and she had polio as a little girl, and uses a wheelchair. And her family sounds a lot like your family, like your parents, right? Where they just assumed she would go to school. And then when it was like, oh, she can't because, we have no way for her wheelchair to fit in here, that was unacceptable to her parents. When you look at where we are today as a society when it comes to disability or disability rights or discrimination, how are we doing?
Well, it depends on who you ask, okay? I'm very, very blessed to call Rick Hansen a friend of mine. Rick Hansen and I are described by some disgruntled disability advocates as what they've labeled the chosen ones. Have you ever heard that expression?
I have.
Yeah, and I'm not insulted by it, frankly. I get why it's said. So if you're going to talk to a lot of people that are working every day in advocacy, they would say that Canada is in terrible shape. They have the right to their opinion. I also know that when I was born, they used to put people like me in sideshows. All right? We don't do that anymore. So I am, again, the optimist that gets in trouble for what they suggest is closing a blind eye to the real struggles in our society. And let's be blunt, there are struggles. We're still learning. We've got a long way to go. But the bigger question is, where is the vested interest in an organization? Let's just say TELUS. I know TELUS very much advocates diversity and inclusion in its worksite. I know that. That's what more companies need to do, but not to do it as a window dressing. We need to remember, not everybody is going to be able to climb the metaphorical Mount Everest, all right? Quality of life should never be judged from the outside looking in. You could have someone like your son, and I'm going to just say this. He has no idea that he has an intellectual disability, but everybody else does. See what I mean? And that's another challenge in our society, is deciding what's their quality or value. See, that's the trouble. Unless we have a vested interest, disabled people, for many, are, well, let's just say it, people are uncomfortable. I actually was in a restaurant in Memphis, Tennessee. This story is in my book. And yes, I have my own book too, and I'll show it to you before the interview is over. But I'm not a book vlogger. Let's just put it that way. But I remember this was a long time ago. My wife and I were at a rib joint in Memphis called Corky's. And we were sitting with a table of about 14 of us that didn't take reservations. And we sat in this very long area by the windows. And next to our table was a little two-seater. And the people asked the manager if they could be moved because they were disgusted with the guy eating ribs with his toes. Now, let's be very candid. It is disgusting to watch me eat ribs with my toes. But what I loved was the manager basically told them if they didn't like the view, they could go to a different restaurant that has a different one. And they did. They literally got up and left. The manager told me why. And what was really fascinating was about 3 weeks later, I get this email with an Irma Bombeck column where somebody has written, we don't know this is the same story, saying they were in a restaurant watching a guy eat food with his feet. They asked the manager to move them. The manager didn't. We were disgusted. Irma, who's right? And Irma wrote back and said, maybe you should stay home. That was a long time ago. But until we have that kind of dramatic personal change in society, people with disability will be viewed in so many different ways. That's why I tell people with disabilities, whatever you need to do, don't take it personal.
We've been groomed, though, as a society to view disability as broken, as wrong, as bad. Oh, you're pregnant. Oh, yeah. I hope it's healthy. I hope it's healthy. And, and when, your child is born with a disability, then you get the, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And that was the hardest part I actually wrote a letter after my son was born. And I wrote a letter to everybody that I knew. And my husband and I sent it to everybody, our parents, family, friends. And it basically told them how to act, what to say. And they needed to say congratulations because we had a beautiful baby boy. Don't say, and the letter said, do not say you're sorry. Because we have a beautiful baby boy. And he was perfectly healthy. He just happens to have an extra chromosome. But people are very uncomfortable with it, Alvin, and they still are today. And it wasn't that long ago that we put babies when they were born and disabled into an institution. It was not very long ago, and there still are institutions in this country.
Well, what we need, and you hit the nail on the head, Tamara, you couldn't have said it any better. And that's where I get frustrated too. I definitely do. But I also know which battle I want to have. Okay? And in my world, that's what I'm a speaker for. It's interesting the way you put that. I didn't become a speaker first. The story came first, and then the speaking happened. And by the way, I didn't plan to be a speaker. It's ironic. I was going to be in broadcasting. I actually was an FM radio disc jockey in Regina, Saskatchewan. And I got a great job. I went to Mount Royal College in Calgary for broadcasting school. And again, here's a school that in 1978 had never seen a handicapped person in their broadcasting program. And I go to apply, I get to the place doing my entrance exam, and they were so worried about what I would do. Well, you know what really saved the day that got me into the program? When I told them that I lived 800 miles, back when we used miles, 800 miles away in a little town in Saskatchewan, that I needed help going to the bathroom because I couldn't do my pants back in those days. Now I've got adaptive clothing. And I drove myself. I was all by myself. I took the entrance exam all by myself. I was even having lunch in the cafeteria when the Dean of Broadcasting went by and saw me and came over and said, you know what? If you can do that, you can be in our program. Now that took an enlightened person in a position of power. But let's also clump this into another category. I'm old enough to remember when mixed race couples were a bad thing. And I'm going to be really blunt. We also lived in a society that is finally starting to embrace gay marriage. That one has always fascinated me. You know what? If you love somebody, what difference does it make what gender they are? I just don't get it. And I could get real upset. But I have other things that I worry about more, like my family, like my son, my wife, our pets. That's my world.
Okay, we have more to talk about, but before we do that, we always, we like to thank our guests for spending some time with us and sharing their story. And we always ask our guests to choose a Canadian nonprofit, and we give them $500 in your name. You chose Variety, the children's charity of Alberta. And why did you choose them?
Well, first of all, I have so many charities I care about. But I will tell you, the first short answer is I love Variety, the charity itself. I've done the telethon in Vancouver on what's now Global Television, the Show of Hearts telethon, for over 35 years. My wife also, I have a little bit of a bias here. My wife is on the board of directors for Variety Alberta. And it's recently kind of started up again after many, many years that it went dormant because they just didn't have people interested in taking care of the charity. Now they do. They're remarkable. So I'll tell you a real quick funny story. Talk about Variety. On Saturday, we have a special event called Go Baby Go. It's a new program for Variety Alberta where they raise funds to purchase little electric cars for preschoolers with mobility issues. And then they get the sponsors. In this case, one of them is going to be Toyota in Calgary here. They're having a show and shine at a Toyota dealership, and they're decorating a Toyota Tundra electric car for one of the handicapped children that's going to be driving it. I think this little boy is 4 and he loves cowboy hats. There's going to be 25 kids be given these vehicles that are customized by teams, mostly from car dealerships in Calgary. And guess who gets to ride the first electric vehicle at the front of the parade and be the Grand Marshal on Saturday morning? Me.
Yeah.
But you know the best part of the story? Let me make this quick. It's not seeing a guy without arms drive with his feet that the kids really love. It's the parents seeing a guy without arms drive a car with his feet, there with his beautiful wife, having a successful career. Because as one parent put it for me when I was doing a variety show, you give us hope. That's what I love about variety.
Awesome. Well, we are giving them $500 for
you.
your time here. So thank you for that. Alvin, let's talk about language for a second, because I've heard you use the word handicap a few times. And my understanding is that word's not acceptable anymore. It's when I was working in television, we never put the disability first because we didn't describe somebody by the disability. Like, my child is not Down syndrome. My child is not a Downs kid. Tell me how you feel about language. Like, and a lot of people, they get really scared. Like, oh, I don't know what the right thing to say is. And I don't know what, if somebody's going to get mad at me or whatever. And I'm really curious as to where you are with language.
So I use the word handicap because it's like a muscle reflex. All right. It's the word that I was accustomed to growing up in the 60s and 70s. And it looked a lot better on paper than the word crippled. I also acknowledge, and I totally agree, language is critical. And I'm guilty. Guilty, Your Honor. But the reality is, here's another little quip. In my lifetime, I've been crippled. I've been handicapped. I've been disabled. I've been a person with a disability. I've been a person with special needs and special challenges. You could call me a John Deere tractor, but it doesn't define who I am. As my mother used to say, labels are for jars. I, however, again, acknowledge that language needs to be watched. And if we change the way language goes, we change the way that it's viewed. The trouble is, and since we're being honest here, some people that don't have disabilities will never cross that path to get to know one because they're so worried about what we just talked about. Making a mistake, saying something inappropriate. You have no idea, Tamara, how many times I've had people, older people in particular, say, hey, can I give you a hand? How about 2? Well, that's not funny. But what do I accomplish by telling them that's not funny? See what I mean? I will let people open my car door, even though I'm driving my own car, because I don't want to get into the fuss about politically correct. Yet I do agree we need to be politically correct. Again, terminology matters. The trouble is a lot of people, and this is again coming from my point of view, with a disability will treat regular folks harshly because they haven't learned to treat themselves any different. A lot of people with disabilities are their own worst enemy. I'm just saying it.
That's fascinating. It's talking to different disabled people all over the country and in the US is, I find that the best way for me to learn is to read. You talked about your book, so we'll talk about that in a second. But, I have a stack of books here that are about disability, written by people with disabilities, about their experiences. And every time I open a book, I learn something new. And we tend to like to put things in columns, right? Like you go over here, or boxes, right? And you go over here, and this goes here. And I've determined who you are by the way you look, Alvin. I've determined what you're capable of in life because of the way you look. So I'm going to move on, and I'm going to move over to this person here and determine. And it's we have to disrupt that.
Yes. Yes. And the way we do that, in my opinion, is what I've always done and why I was motivated to be a speaker in the first place. I wanted to send my version of the message. Okay? So I want to do something a little off the wall here before we run out of time, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to move my chair and I'm going to stand up in front of the camera and I'm going to say, here's my body. Okay? This is what it looks like. In a world where body perfect is so important, this is where my problems begin. Because you're right. People don't look at me and go, hey man, you got no arms, that's awesome. But what happens when I sit down and do something like this? And again, this is part of what I do in my programs as well, but I think your audience would enjoy this as a thought. So, don't want applause, but I'm betting there's people that are watching this right now that just got a totally different idea of what Alvin Law is. I'm a drummer. I'm a musician. We need to have more visibility in our workplaces, in our communities with disability so that the learning takes care of itself. Because most people would not go to the trouble of getting a book like you have, Tamara, and read it. Okay, so here, I'm just going to do this real quick. Here's my book. What's it called, though? It's called Alvin's Laws of Life. All right? This is not a book about my journey as much as it's about lessons learned by living life with a disability. And my 5 laws, they actually spell my name, A-L-V-I-N, are like Stephen Covey habits. Attitude, learning, valuing your life and spirit, imagination, and never giving up. They're meant to soften the blow, to help people understand we all need to learn. But where is the vested interest? I say that one more time, okay? I'm actually learning in my own way something fascinating. You didn't meet my wife, Darlene. You can sort of see the picture of my family up on the wall behind me. Here's a little close-up of my family. I'll just put it up to the camera. I know we're getting close to time here, but there's my little family, see? That's an old picture. But again, look at my wife. Look at me. Who has the disability? In fact, my wife has a worse disability than I do because she's practically deaf. She's lost her hearing over time. It's a genetic problem, and she couples that with tinnitus or tinnitus, which means she can't hear properly. I can't call her from my living room here. If she was in the kitchen, I have to go in, get her attention so she can see my face. And when we masked up for COVID, she lost even more communication. So we're having a hard enough time learning to feel comfortable with physical disabilities. We don't even talk about the hidden ones, because there's hidden ones everywhere. So this needs to fall under the subject matter that probably annoys a few people, and that is inclusion and diversity is not a secret scheme from HR. It's a way we need to go forward in society because every demographic is represented.
Alvin, you are a treasure. Seriously, I can't thank you enough for this conversation. I really can't. I just, I learned a lot from you in the last 28 minutes, a lot. And, just when I think that I kind of have it all figured out, you put a different spin on it. And I love the looking forward. And I love how you speak about it. And I love how you share. So thank you very, very much for that.
Well, thank you. And thank TELUS for being interested in this subject. Again, that's how we change.
It is how we change.
The lead and making a promise that they're going to be better. Thank you, TELUS.
Well, thank you, Alvin. And I just want to mention that your website is Alvin, ALVIN, law, LAW.com. And you are on Twitter, and your Twitter handle is Toes Law.
That's right, because Alvin Law was taken. Toes is my nickname. I even got on my license plates.
I love it. Thank you, Alvin.
Thank you, Tamara. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for listening to another episode of TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Be sure to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for another conversation. You can also check out our website, telus.com/podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at TELUS Talks.